what do you do if you set up a game, you diagram the rules correctly, maybe you make one or two small connections, but it doesn't seem like it's the kind of game where it's going to be productive to draw multiple worlds. It doesn't seem like you're able to make any big impactful inferences. How do we react to this situation? And I think there's two common reactions that actually depend on how much studying you've done. When you're just starting off studying, that's totally normal, right? In fact, you don't even expect to do anything at the start. So you just go into the questions and you just try your best, right? After you've studied a little bit though, and you've gotten used to the idea of making inferences at the start, maybe you've been able to be successful because you've made inferences at the start in other games, you've split those games into different worlds. If you're that kind of logic game test taker, then when you're not able to make inferences at the start, that actually becomes a little bit uncomfortable, right? You start to wonder if you're doing something wrong, if there's like some really efficient way to solve the game that you're just missing. And the purpose of today's lesson, I think, is to convince you that first, you're probably not missing something. Second, even if you are, there's nothing you can do about it. So your only solution is to just go into the questions and solve those questions efficiently. And you actually can finish logic game sections efficiently and accurately, even if you miss big inferences at the start, if you know how to approach the questions and know how to test answers. And you're also willing to, I like to think of the phrase roll up your sleeves, because it's like you're about to do some work. You're about to do something that may not be very pretty, but if you're prepared to do it, then the end result can still be just the same as if you solved it in a more elegant way. All right. So when you don't make any inferences, what does this actually mean? Well, there's a couple of possibilities. It is possible that you did misinterpret a rule or just forgot about a rule, especially in the initial paragraph of the game. So if that's the case, of course you want to double check the rules and the constraints in that initial paragraph, especially if you have numbers-based constraints. It's very easy to miss in that initial paragraph something that says like, oh, this person goes twice, or this person must go at least once, or not every slot has to be filled. It's very easy to miss those kinds of numbers-based inferences, so maybe you want to double check that if you can't really figure anything out at the start. But assuming that you are correct on that and you're confident in your setup, then there's really two possibilities here when you don't make any inferences. It's possible that there actually are just no important inferences to make. And that's not uncommon. They do present games like that where there isn't anything to do at the start besides understand the rules well. The other possibility is there is an inference, but it's just hard to notice and you didn't notice it. So either way, there's only one solution, right? And that is to just accept it and get ready to do work on the questions. I think one mistake that people make is maybe they do suspect that there's an inference, but the issue is, unless it's standing out to you in like 10, 15 seconds about thinking about the relevant rules, thinking about connections, there's nothing you can do about it, right? So instead of staring longer, if you start just going into the questions, what you'll find is you might actually figure out that inference once you start doing work on the questions, all right? So how do we actually do work on the questions efficiently though? And I think that comes down to a couple of things. The first is being good at doing work on those if questions. And you guys know those questions where they give you a new condition. If X is in 1, then what must be true? If L is in 2, then what could be true? So when it comes to doing work on the if questions, this I think should be review for you guys. But basically remember, almost all the time, you should be drawing a new diagram. You should input the new condition if you can. And then you should check the rules, starting with any rules that relate to the letter that was part of the if, the letter that was part of the condition. And then if you can follow a chain of inferences, you try to go as far as you can based on applying the rules, and then you go to the answer choices, right? But something else that you might need to be prepared to do is to be ready to draw worlds for an individual question. And if you've seen some of my other YouTube videos, I do have a video on this, but just to recap that idea, sometimes after you put in the new condition, like let's say you put x in 2, there's nothing obvious that happens next, or you're not able to figure much else out. So sometimes the issue is you just need to take another rule that's restrictive, that only goes down in 2 or 3 places, and draw those out for the question. A lot of people get paralyzed when they input the condition and then nothing seems to happen. They might stare at the page for a little bit. Maybe they'll go to the answers, and that could be a good way of doing it as well. But another usually reliable way of doing it is to see if you can draw worlds for an individual question. All right. But then one more thing to keep in mind too is sometimes there's just too many possibilities. And then it's totally fine to go to the answers and start testing some of the answers directly if you're left with a couple. All right. And what is too many possibilities, by the way? To me, it's going to be 4 or more. So if I put down the condition of a problem, but I don't see a way to split the game or split the work for that question into just 2 or 3 possibilities, then I'm okay with just going to the answer choices, and we're not necessarily doing anything wrong. That may just be how the question's supposed to be solved. All right. So when it comes to actually testing answer choices, though, when you get into the answer choices, there are a couple of things that you really have to be prepared for and practice to do questions well when you haven't made inferences at the start. And so let's go into a couple of these topics, and then I do want to take a look at a couple of examples. All right. So first, how do you actually test the answers? I remember when I first started teaching, I used to take this for granted, that people knew how to test whether something must be true or could be true, and so on. But I found that this is actually something that a lot of students could work on, maybe even create like flashcards to memorize things. Because if you don't know how to test whether an answer must be true, you're going to pause a little bit. You're going to be confused by the answer choices. So let's just review that here. Let's say I'm doing a question and the question is asking which of the following must be true. Can you guys think, how would I actually test an answer choice to see whether it must be true? How do I figure out, for example, whether A must be in group 1? Do I want to try to put A in group 1 and see, what do you guys think? If I want to test whether something must be true, do I want to try to see, let's try to see if this answer works. Could this happen? Raina's saying it has to be true in all the worlds. Yeah, and so if you just try to show that an answer works, you haven't quite proven it must be true. You've just proven that it could be true. So if you want to test whether something must be true, you actually want to try to go against what the answer says. If I want to figure out whether A must be in 1, I'm going to try to put A in 2 or A in 3 and see if that works. Because if it does, then it's a wrong answer. But if I can't go against the answer, then I've proven that it must be true. All right. So how do I prove whether something could be true? Can you think about that? If I'm looking at an answer choice and the question's asking what could be true, how do I test that? This one's probably the easiest one. Just try to show that the answer works. Yeah. And so Raina's pointing out, if it happens in 1, as long as you come up with 1 possible arrangement that works, you've proven that that's the answer. All right. What about must be false? Now, Dai, you're saying others are wrong. So when you're looking for what could be true, the 4 wrong answers are going to be things that must be false. And so you're right that like if you can look at the answer and tell that it must be false based on the rules or based on, other inferences you made, you could totally eliminate that way. So I'm not advocating just jumping in and then trying to test the answer immediately. But when you are in the situation where you do feel like you just have to test the answer, then for it could be true, we'll just try to see that, just show one possibility where it does work. What if you're trying to test an answer and the question is, which of the following must be false? How do I test whether an answer must be false? Well, I want to see if it could be true. So if I test the answer and I show that what it's saying actually could be true, then it doesn't have to be false and I can get rid of it, right? But if I try to show that the answer works, but I'm not able to make it work, that's when it's a must be false answer. All right. Any questions about that so far? And we'll definitely get into some examples, so it's not just abstract. Okay. This one's pretty rare, but how do I test whether an answer could be false? The question is asking which of the following could be false, or which of the following must be true except. How do I tell whether it could be false? Well, I want to try to go against the answer. Because if I can do the opposite of the answer, or do something that goes against what the answer says, then if that's possible, then I've shown it could be false. But if I try to go against the answer and I'm not able to, then that means it must be true and it's not going to be the correct answer. All right. So I hope that makes sense. These are the approaches we want to take when we're actually down to like trying to test the answer directly. Some people call it like brute forcing the question. I kind of think of it as like plug and chug. You're like just plugging in an answer or just plugging in something to see if it works, and you're just chugging along like a train, just continuing to crunch out those diagrams. This is not necessarily our first instinct though. If we're doing a question, it is nice to scan the answers or just try to be a little bit more strategic about which ones to try first, and that's the next point. But when you are in the situation where you just feel like I have to test the answer, then this is how you want to do it. All right. So, another key factor in doing work efficiently is trying to be strategic about which answer choices you try first. And there's a couple of points that I think are really helpful here. First is make sure you use prior work, right? So if you have other work that shows some answers could be true or can't be true, it helps to scan, look at your prior work if it's easy to interpret, because it might cut down on the work that you have to do for an individual question. Don't forget about also the answer to the very first question, the one where you use the rules to eliminate. Usually you're going to end up with one possibility. And sometimes it actually is helpful to either click back to that question to look at the example of what could be true, or even write that example of what could be true on your scratch paper so it's easy to look back at. All right. Another really important factor, not all the time, but on some games, is noticing logically interchangeable variables. And do you guys have a sense of what I mean by that? If you've seen some of my game explanations, occasionally I refer to this issue. It's when you have two letters that are logically treated exactly the same. And so, yes, Meng is pointing out multiple floaters, right? If you have two letters, none of which have rules about them, they're actually just basically the same letter, all right? And that can be a huge factor in getting to the right answer much faster than you would otherwise. What you also find too, though, is sometimes letters can be logically interchangeable even when they do have rules about them, all right? It's just that the rules that are about them affect those letters equally. So we'll see an example of that. But maybe, for example, you have a rule that says letter A can't go in the first spot, and also letter B can't go in the first spot. Okay, there's rules about those letters, but if there's no other rule that distinguishes A from B, then those are still logically interchangeable variables, and it's still important or helpful to notice those, all right? So Rain is saying, I see when the answers are the same for interchangeable letters, so two free agent letters, it's very often wrong, yeah. There can be some circumstances where, just depending on the way the question is asked, the condition of the problem, sometimes you do need to be a little bit careful. So you can't just automatically say, I think, that like letters with answers with free agents, if you have multiple of them, are wrong. But that's just like an edge case. As a general matter, if you have two letters that don't have any rules about them and they both show up in the answer choices, you can be pretty confident that they're not correct. All right. And then there's one more tip here for trying to be strategic. And it's a little bit odd because it seems like contradictory advice, but depending on the question, it might be better to focus either on the letters that are mentioned in rules, right? Letters that are mentioned in more rules, or it might be more helpful to focus on the free agents. And as a general matter, it depends on what the question is asking. If the question is asking which of the following could be true, then it's probably more likely that the free agent variables, the ones that don't have rules about them, are more likely to be the correct answer. It's not a rule. There's plenty of times where they're still wrong, but it might help to look at those answers first when you're looking for what could be true. But on the other hand, if the question's asking which of the following must be true, probably you want to focus on letters that are mentioned in the rules. If you can tell, which letter is mentioned in more rules or more impactful rules, those are probably the letters that you want to look at. All right. Now, I don't want to spend or make you think that these tips here about strategic choices when you go to the answers, I don't want to make you think that this is dominant in your way of approaching questions or should be dominant, because sometimes what happens is you just feel like you need to be more clever than you can be. And I think what happens is when people notice that there are very fast or elegant ways to solve questions, particularly when they're reviewing the game afterwards, they start thinking, how do I do that during the timed exam? And maybe you can do it and maybe it does help. But then there's a balance, because if you're staring at the question for 20 seconds, looking at the rules, trying to see, like, is there some clever way to get to the answer? Actually, someone who just didn't bother with that and just went directly to the answer choices, went to A, B, C, D, E, they actually might be able to solve the question faster, right? So there's kind of a balance depending on your own style of doing games. Sometimes people are just a little bit too into testing answer choices. They're not strategic enough, and they could improve that way. But especially with people who are more experienced with games and who are, pretty good, I find that their issue more is they try to be too clever. And the thing is, it's like, well, if we don't notice how to get to the answer in a clever way in like 10 to 15 seconds, really we just have to go in there and start doing the work. And sometimes people are too slow to just jump right in and start doing the work. All right. So finally, when it comes to just like testing the answers A through E, I think one thing that can be helpful to keep in mind is that at the very most, you'll only have to test 4 answers, right? Because if you test 4 answers and none of them are correct, then you have to pick the remaining one, right? And ideally, you're not going to test that answer as well, because if you trust the work that you did for the other 4 answers, you have to just pick the remaining one. Most of the time, though, you don't have to test 4 answers, because maybe you try answer choice A, and the work you do for answer choice A might actually prove another answer choice is wrong as well. And sometimes, you're able to get rid of maybe 1 or 2 based on being strategic, and so you have just fewer answer choices to try. Or sometimes the answer is just answer choice A, and you try it, and then it's correct, and then you just move on, right? So if you are a little bit intimidated by just going to the answers and trying them out, you might actually be surprised at how efficiently you can get through games without doing all this fancy nonsense at the start, right? So I've mentioned before that no game absolutely requires worlds. And that's because if you are skilled at trying answer choices and being strategic about the answer choices, then you can totally solve many games that other people might otherwise approach using different worlds. All right. So one more thing before we jump to an example. I just want to talk about some good logic game habits. All right. This is stuff that, I'm sure you're familiar with, but I'll just want to emphasize. Make sure you're organized about the work that you do. And to me, that means numbering the work with the question that it's associated with. So if I'm, drawing out something for number 10, I'm going to write number 10 next to it. Most of the time, I can't say I consistently do it every time, but I will try. If I'm trying out an answer choice for a particular problem, I will often even label it with the answer choice too. Now that might be a little bit excessive, and sometimes, you might be confused if you wrote, answer choice B, but then you start thinking B is a variable in the game. So, you don't want to take it too far, but just give some thought to whether you're organized and whether it's easy to look at your prior work and use it. All right. Another thing that I think it's always helpful to remind yourself of is that you should be going back to the rules probably a lot more than you think you should, right? So much of the reason that some questions take so long is just that you just forgot about a rule, right? And then it takes you 30 seconds to notice, oh yeah, we have this rule that says if A is in 1, then X has to be in 5. So if you're ever stuck, just not sure what to do, you just find yourself staring at the page, well, it might help to just, in a very systematic way, go back to every single rule and just almost treat it as a checklist. How does this rule affect things? Have I checked on rule 2, rule 3, rule 4? All right. Another thing that you want to get in the habit of doing if you find yourself staring is constantly asking who's left. What variables do I still have to put down? Sometimes it's even helpful to recopy the set of variables next to the work you're doing, cross off the letters that you've already put down. It's just a lot easier to see who's left. Sometimes people will use their fingers to cover up the letters that they've already put down. Maybe that's another way to notice who's left. All right. And then the final thing is just, if you find yourself stuck, it seems like there's no right answer. It seems like there's just too many possibilities. You're getting overwhelmed. Maybe you should double check the question, because, there's definitely been times where the condition was put, if X is in spot 6, then what could be true? And then I put X in spot 5, and then I do all this work and nothing seems to be working. But I just had to read the question. Or sometimes the question is, which of the following must be true? But then it seems like there's 2 or 3 answers that are correct, because maybe you were thinking about it as it could be true. And so it seems like there's all these answers that could be true. And then you have to just remind yourself to check the question, what it's asking. All right. So I hope that was helpful as a brief overview of some pointers when it comes to trying out work. But before we jump into 3 or 4 games, I do want to take a look at some examples. All right. So do you remember how I was saying sometimes you need to draw worlds for individual questions? And just to orient ourselves with this game, we have 7 different slots. It's a 1-to-1 ordering game. We have a block that says it's going to be F space H. We have a block that says K and L are next to each other, but they're interchangeable in the order. And then we have a rule that says G and I can't go next to each other. Now, first of all, does it make sense that we might be on the fence about splitting this game into worlds at the very beginning? Because, even though we do have this FH block, how many different places can this FH block fit right now? Can you think about that? It seems like it can go in 1, 3, 2, 4, 3, 5, 4, 6, 5, 7. So do you see how that's 5 different places? There's no other rule about F or H. I'm not saying it would be wrong to draw worlds here, but it's probably not as helpful as it would be in other situations. So let's say we didn't draw worlds, right? And then let's say we're doing a question And the question says, if G is in spot 3. So if G is in spot 3, which of the following must be true? Well, a lot of times what would happen is you would redraw a set of slots, right? You wouldn't put it over your main diagram. You would redraw it. You'd put G in 3. You look at the rule about G, right? So I can't go in 2, and then I can't go in 4. But now, what do? Right? We already applied rule 3. We still have these other 2 rules left. What do you think your instinct would be if the question was, if G is in 3, which of the following must be true? So Raina's saying KL. Maybe we can put the KL down and think about where it goes. I might pay more attention to the wider block though, right? Because the wider block, remember the FH, initially had too many places. It was 5 different places. That's a lot of stuff to draw out. But once you put the G in 3, now where can the FH go? It seems like it can go in 2, 4, right? It seems like the FH could go in 4, 6. And then it seems like the FH can go in 5, 7. So do you see how that's now 3 different places, much more manageable, and I actually would have no problem just jumping immediately into doing that, even if it's just for a single question, because I know that that's going to solve the situation. I'm going to figure things out. And on top of that, the diagrams that I draw, if I had to draw 3 versions of the FH for this one question, that might help on other questions as well. I mean, there's a good chance some of those diagrams are going to be useful in understanding the game and eliminating answers. So that's the way that I would approach it. A lot of people, though, they wouldn't do that and they would just go to the answers. And that is okay too, you know. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But you should be thinking, well, if you find yourself getting stuck occasionally, or it just takes you longer to, you're just having trouble finishing games on time, it might actually just be more helpful to be more systematic about it. And sometimes what happens is you pause for a little bit thinking what the next step is, and maybe you think you're missing something, but actually no, you're not missing anything. There just is really nothing else to figure out, and it's either we're going to figure out where the FH goes, draw it all out, or we go to the answers, test out the answers. Either way is fine as long as you just get right into doing it, all right? So that's an example of maybe drawing worlds for an individual question. I want to take a look at another exercise here. And this one is going to be about maybe being strategic about choices and using prior work. All right. So let's say we're doing a grouping game where we have 6 letters being grouped into 3 different groups. Each of the groups have 2 slots. All right. And now I haven't written up the rules here. Let's pretend like we don't know what the rules are. In addition, this blue diagram here, this is just one potential arrangement, all right? So this is not how it has to be. There's just one way that we know does work, okay? Can you think about this? Which of the following must be false? And by the way, the Y and the Z, I've circled because that's my notation to say those are free agents. So there were rules about Q, T, V, and X, but there were no rules about Y and Z. Can you use the prior work here and our knowledge of the free agents to figure out which of the following must be false? So, Dai is saying C. Possibly, you know, I wrote this example, but I don't remember what I made the answer, so we'll have to figure it out together. What do you guys think? Okay. So, yeah, you guys, everyone's picking C. It's probably right, but let's go through it. Reina, if you don't mind speaking, would you share how you got to C?
Okay, good morning. I see 2 free agents,
Mm-hmm.
Y and Z, and so I am thinking they can go anywhere they want.
Okay.
So I'm going to take them out of the choices.
Okay.
Y and Z. Then I see V is in 3. Well, I see it's in 3, so it cannot be false. Duh.
Okay.
And then Q is in 2. I don't see it in 2.
Okay.
But it's not a free agent. And then T is in 2. It's clearly not false. So it's
Yeah.
basically elimination and intuition.
That's right. Yeah. And so, especially, right, we do have examples of V in 3 and T in 2. So you can definitely get rid of answer choice B and answer choice E. And you also can get rid of answer choice A and D. I do just want to be a little bit careful here because the reason, and it's kind of an artificial situation because we don't even know what the rules are, but the reason you would get rid of A and D is because both of those answers are like saying the same thing, right? Y and Z are interchangeable variables. So if it were true that like Y could never go in group 1, if that was going to be the answer,
Yes.
then it would also have to be true that Z couldn't go in group 1 either.
Yes,
Does that make sense?
that was my other thinking like 10 minutes ago. I
Yeah.
used that several times in games. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And the reason I would just want to emphasize that that's the logic, it's that like if one of these answers was correct, then the other answer would also have to be correct too, and that doesn't make sense. The reason I want to emphasize that's the logic is because it is possible for a free agent to have to go in a particular place, depending on the question and the rules. So like I would just be careful if you're thinking these are both free agents. So if it's like a must be false or must be true, they can't be correct. I mean, probably they're not going to be the answer, but you can't rely on that as a rule. The real reason A and D are wrong here is because they're essentially saying the same thing. All right. Any questions about that, you guys? So let me give you another one then, as a challenge. And for this next one, you're not going to be able to get it down to one answer. All right. So don't try to do that. But can you at least eliminate a couple and then get it down to which ones we would have to test out? So which of the following must be true? So what answers would we be left with? We can eliminate A because T can go in group 2, right? So we can go against what A says. Can we get rid of anything else? Okay. So Meng, you're saying we're left with B, C, E. Oh, B, C, D. Okay. Yeah, B, C, D. We can get rid of, Meng, can you explain why can we eliminate E? I think you're right about that, but yeah, just explain your reasoning there.
Because Y and Z, as earlier we pointed out, would be logically equivalent. So it wouldn't be making sense that Y has to be in group 2.
Yeah. Because based on our prior work, if we know that this is one possible arrangement, well, Y and Z are actually interchangeable. And so, maybe for this particular problem that we were doing this prior work for, we happen to put Y in 2 and Z in 3. But if you can recognize, actually, it could be like this, because they're interchangeable, then you can get rid of answer choice Z. Yeah. Now, I just want to go through the other one. So B, T is not in group 3. Let's see, could T be in group 3? I'm not sure. Q is in group 1. Could Q be outside of group 1? I'm not sure. And also the same thing with, yeah. So we are left with B, C, and D. Sometimes people might be confused by C and D because they see it happening in one of our prior diagrams, but that's just one possibility. It doesn't prove it must be true. All right. So, yeah, I hope that this was helpful because we are actually going to be doing exactly this on some games. And these are games where, maybe there is actually stuff you could do up front, but today I want to practice not doing that at all. All right.